Thank you very much to everyone who's joined us. I'd just, like to start out by thanking our sponsors at the Mellon Foundation, who provided funding for this Arabic script OCR Catalyst project. Here we are. John, could you'll handle the waiting room, I assume. I think I see everyone here, but in this first part of the meeting, as I said, I thank our sponsors at the Mellon Foundation and thank everyone for coming to the technical advisory meeting for our project. The idea is, as we come to the end of this first phase of the project, to get advice and feedback, on what we've done so far and things, technical, foci that we might have in the future, as well as hearing from some people who are doing very interesting work, both in OCR proper, in evaluating OCR, in creating data sets for OCR, and in thinking about, computational bibliography generally, is how I would put it. So, just so that I don't have to, embarrass myself by introducing all of you and your accomplishments and mispronouncing your names, we'll just spend a couple of minutes for the project team members who are here today and our advisor group members to introduce themselves. So I'll stop sharing and just ask, and I'll ask people to introduce themselves. I'm David Smith, your host. I'm in Computer and Information Sciences at Northeastern University in Boston. And my co-PI, Matt Miller. Okay, yeah, Sarah is here. Sarah Savant is here today. You say hello.
Hello. I'm Sarah Savant. I'm the PI of the Kitab project and co-PI of the OpenITI.
Great. And Matt Miller.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We really appreciate it. My name is Matthew Miller, and I'm the PI on the OpenITI AOCP project.
Great. Alejandro has been working with us for a couple of years. Alejandro Toselli, he's now moved on, but is graciously participating to discuss our work. Yes, hello. And Jonathan Allen, I see is also here today. He's a postdoc at the University of Maryland, as well as John Mullen, who's a graduate student at the University of Maryland. Okay, so just for the advisory group members to introduce themselves, I'm thinking I will share the screen again. Right, we'll just we'll go alphabetically. Antonis.
Hi all, I'm Adonis Anastasopoulos. I'm also a PI at a OCR related project. My main focus is on NLP for endangered languages. And I'm at George Mason in DC.
Great.
Hi, I'm Apostolos Antonakopoulos. I lead the pattern recognition image analysis group at the University of Salford, and we have several projects ongoing in document analysis for the past few decades. Some familiar faces here. I'm very pleased to be here and offer any advice and share and learn from you as well.
Hi all, I'm Taylor. I'm in computer science and natural language processing at University of California, San Diego, and we've done a fair amount of work on OCR and continue to as well. Excited to be here.
And more importantly, you're in the Pacific, one of our participants from the Pacific time zone. So thank you for joining. And thank you, Apostolos, for joining at the end of your day. I believe Quinn will be here later. She's somebody else in the Pacific time zone who will be here in about half an hour. Adi, hello.
Yes, hello. So Adike Schoonbaert. I'm a digital curator for Asian and African collections at the British Library. Very happy to be here and see a lot of good friends.
Great. Hello, Shruti.
Hi, I'm Shruti. I'm a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon. I've been working on OCR post-production for low resource languages, specifically on the NLP side, and using NLP models to improve OCR transcriptions for these languages. I'm excited to be here, and it's great to meet all of you.
Maria.
Yes, hello, I'm Maria Riskina. I'm a PhD student. I'm also a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon. I work with Taylor here, and I've done some, I work on generally computational linguistics, but specifically language variation, and I've done some work on computational models for historical bibliography and things like compositor attribution. And I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. And Nikolai.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nikolai Vogler. I'm a third-year PhD student in computer science at UCSD, working with Taylor. I work on mostly trying to improve OCR and HTR for or using unlabeled data. Look forward to working with you.
Great. Thank you very much. So we'll get to hear from some of them later. I've asked particular members of the advisory group to say something about their work, but I'm hoping that other members of the group, even though I haven't asked them, for formal presentations of a few minutes, are certainly welcome to to join. To give background from their own expertise when topics come up. Okay, so I circulated an agenda to you all about an hour ago. It's fairly straightforward, as I explained in our earlier communications. I'm going to talk a little bit about the progress that we've made over this first phase of the Arabic Script OCR Catalyst project. I won't talk too long so that we can also hear from all the other members of the group and exchange information about what's going on. And then, as I said, I've asked particular members of the group to talk a little bit about their current and ongoing work. But others are welcome to participate, and we'll have some discussion about interesting points and implications of both our work in the AOCP project and members of our advisory group. And then in the second part of this meeting, I'd like to focus on two main themes, and I'll suggest a few particular points for discussion. But when we get to those parts of the meeting, but the two main themes are what technical goals and approaches we in the Arabic Script OCR Catalyst project ought to take in future phases of our project. What should we change about how we're doing? What technical problems would be most interesting to focus on? What data set creation and evaluation things should we most focus on? And that's where we'll transition into this second main part of the discussion for what I'm thinking is about the final 20 minutes of the meeting, where we discuss not only what we should focus on within our project, but how we can craft our working contributions in, for instance, creating data sets and evaluations and tools to benefit the rest of the community, both those who are here, members of the advisory group, members of the wider public in this public meeting, or other use cases that you know of and want to represent by your participation in this meeting. This is very broad, and I'll have a few particular proposals for discussion when we get to that part. But this meeting doesn't cover everything that we in the AOCP project are interested in. There will be more meetings in all of our lives, of course, but for purposes of this project, I want to mention that we are planning to have at least one more meeting, a public meeting of this kind later on in the spring, at which we'll focus to complement our today's discussion on technical focus, with a focus on building community for Arabic script corpus and textual editing by means of optical character recognition and handwritten text recognition, right? So how can members of the community who are interested in Arabic and Persian and Urdu and Ottoman Turkish and so on, collaborate and reinforce each other's work in building up a community of textual scholars, digital humanists, digital historians, and so forth in these areas. So stay tuned for that later meeting. Matt or John, is there anything else that I should say about the larger context here, or where the project is going, or what other consultation we'd like to have?
No, I think that's helpful. We can come back. I don't want to take up more time here with broader context and stuff. If anybody has any questions, feel free when we kind of open this up to come back and ask. But otherwise, I'll let things proceed.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry, David. I just also wanted to briefly reiterate, because we've had a fair number of people come into the meeting since this was last said, but if you haven't noticed already, this meeting will be recorded. If anybody's presenting later on who would not like to be recorded, just please let me or David know in the chat and we can turn it off for your presentation. That's all. Thank you, David.
Great. Thank you. Yes, we need to have some advantage for being here live, secret presentations. Okay, so to speak at a very high level, and my historian and literary scholars colleagues can jump in and elaborate as they see fit, but we are interested in producing editions, producing computational tools for transcribing Arabic script, print, and eventually manuscript. In this first phase of the project, we focused on print. And just to give a little historical context for why this is a technical area to focus on, the Arabic script literary tradition, sometimes referred to as the literary production of the Islamicate world, is one of the largest, perhaps the largest pre-modern textual tradition, with the possible exception of Chinese before 1500 roughly. This is true both for the number of manuscripts that are still extant and the print editions of those works produced in the pre-modern world. However, some technological tendencies in the modern world make focusing on Arabic script print OCR a particularly interesting endeavor to undertake. First of all, printing with movable type became very substantial fairly late in Arabic script languages, really gaining critical mass mostly in the 19th century. At the very beginning of the 19th century, or I guess the last year of the 18th century, however, another technology complemented movable type, namely the invention of lithography, which allowed these more complex connected scripts to be reproduced in ways that were more technically difficult with letterpress printing. And so in parallel over the 19th century, we have a fairly restricted set of typefaces compared to the long tradition of impressions in East Asian languages, the long tradition of letterpress printing in European languages. And so that means a focus on the typefaces of movable type in the 19th century is a feasible goal for one project to undertake. It also means, thinking about the future, that a focus on manuscript culture and manuscript transmission is likely to have an even greater benefit for the Arabic script languages than it does for all of you in the audience, some of whom I know are working on Latin script manuscripts, and other handwritten traditions. So our focus in this first phase of the project has been on print in Arabic, both being able to transcribe text such as this one from the Bulak press, transcribe, analyzing the layout, the slightly diagonal marginal material here, very typical frame around the text, all challenges to the baseline OCR models that we started out the project with. And the range of different typefaces, as I said, is we focused in this beginning of the project on 10 core typefaces and several at least twice that in typefaces for which we have a smaller amount of data. This is an example of Amriki, which also shows layouts of images, equations, and so forth. This is not, Arabic script OCR is not just, of course, for the Arabic language, but also Persian and Urdu. In this, typical Nastaliq typeface, you can see the diagonal tendency of these connected words, which is the principal difficulty in dealing with Urdu and Ottoman Turkish. There's also, of course, the question of mixed scripts here. And I could go into more detail during our discussion, but just to give you an idea of the baseline technical dimensions of what we've done so far in the project, up till the end of calendar 2021, we'd processed about 1,500 annotated pages, making up around 41,000 annotated and transcribed lines. We've since ingested a good deal more in the first part of this year, but the base quantitative numbers for you to intake is that we went from a baseline Arabic script OCR model in Arabic, Persian, Urdu, and Ottoman Turkish, where the baseline model was trained on synthetic data from a character accuracy rate of 78%, to, on the basis of this annotated data across the typefaces that we focused on, a character accuracy rate of 95%. This is accuracy measured for all characters. So, if we think about, mixed Latin and English, punctuation, diacritics, and so forth, that's what you see in that first column. If we focus only on base Arabic letters that have been normalized, things like Aleph Maksura, dots or no dots, and so forth, and other kinds of normalization focusing just on Arabic letters, both sets of numbers get a little bit higher. So the baseline accuracy is about 80%, and our accuracy at the end of this initial period is 96.72% across all typefaces. Since this is being recorded, I should note that by the terms of our contract with the Mellon Foundation, we're aiming to have over 97% character accuracy rates for Arabic and Persian, and we do achieve that. But this is averaged over across all of the languages that we've been focusing on. We also, in addition to training and improving transcription models, have focused on better layout analysis models for some of the problems particular to Arabic books. In an example of the Bulak press page that I started the presentation with, the ability to extract this marginal material, extract diagonal lines and marginal material, page numbers, catchwords in yellow at the bottom has been improved. Oh, sorry, I see some people are asking some things in the chat, and my mouse was going blotto. Oh, great. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I picked so yes, don't let the computer scientist pick the Ottoman example at the beginning. Right, thank you, Till.
No, David, you were correct. It was an Ottoman typeface. It was produced in Istanbul in the 1880s, just printing Arabic. So
It was an Ottoman typeface. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
It's not Ottoman Turkish.
Right. So get your metadata right. And oh, sorry. Yeah, for some reason when I'm, in this call, when I'm sharing my screen, when I go full screen, my mouse goes away, which isn't usually a problem, but it just makes it a little harder for me to manipulate the chat. Okay, so just in a lot of cases, we've improved the layout analysis for the kinds of documents that we tend to see in 19th century printed Arabic and Persian and so forth, running titles and footnotes as well. Figures, there's one problem on this page, right? You see the dangling line right above the figure is improperly annotated on the right compared to the ground truth on the left. Or in this case, some ragged edges, unjustified edges in printing are improperly analyzed on the right compared to the ground truth as we have it on the left. We have also, in addition to expending effort in annotating individual lines and individual pages for their layout and for their correct transcription, have invested time in building pipelines for distant supervision of both transcription and layout. So for instance, we worked on training better OCR transcription models by aligning noisy OCR produced by the baseline model with digital additions that already exist, and then using that forced alignment to retrain the OCR models. When we start from baseline models, this can lead to some reasonable improvements. So for instance, in the the nicest case here is that gold colored jazz line where the baseline model gets under 70% character error rate. And after bootstrapping with aligned data, we can get over 85% character error rate. We've also used a similar technique to bootstrap training for layout analysis models. We did this work, we did our primary experiments here in early modern Latin script books because we didn't have a large enough set of Arabic script books at this stage with paired with digital editions to do this work, but we hope to port this work over to the Arabic script data in the near future. Basically, the idea is that if a digital edition exists for a work such as these pages from the Deutsches Textarchiv or similar pages from the Text Creation Partnership for early modern English books or the Women Writers Project for early modern books, where the editors of these transcriptions have used markup to indicate footnotes, catchwords, signature marks, figures, figure captions, and so forth. We can then take this XML digital edition, produce a forced alignment there in the middle with the baseline OCR in order to infer what the annotation of different regions on the page should be as visualized on the right-hand side. And this allows us to get fairly accurate precision and recall in retrieving certain kinds of page elements, such as body text, footnotes, do a little bit, very common page elements like page number, do, somewhat worse on rarer or sparser page elements, such as figures, signature marks, catchwords, and so forth. Right. Finally, I'd like to mention some other technical foci that we've had in the first stage of the project, which are going to be important for some of the things we'd like to focus on in the next stages of the project. First of all, we've made progress in efficiently computing entropy-based confidence measures from the CTC matrix of the Kraken OCR system that we're working with. So here on the right-hand side is a figure showing high entropy, so the blue line being higher, for parts of the OCR output that we're uncertain of, as well as producing line-level confidence metrics that correlate well with observed error rates on annotated data. Complement to confidence estimation is language modeling, which is, can be used as another method of confidence estimation, but also a way of rescoring lattices, rescoring n-best lists, or doing post-correction on OCR output. One of the biggest roadblocks to our current work in this area is that decoding, producing a lattice from the CTC matrices has been too slow heretofore to be practical. And finally, as I noted in passing, when we're trying to evaluate layout analysis for rare items such as catchwords or running titles, and as we get lower accuracy on those sparser phenomenon than we do on very common phenomena such as body text or footnotes, we see the same problem at the individual character level. And a prime example of characters that are rare in Arabic text are vocalizations, where most Arabic texts as they're printed are not vocalized except for certain genres such as the Quran or commentaries that quote the Quran and so on. And so we can see a bimodal behavior in models that are evaluated on texts that contain a reasonable amount of vocalization. In the lower left of each of these graphs, we see the normal, a normal kind of line, right, which has very little to no vocalization at all, and gets a very low error rate or a high accuracy rate. But there are a small number of lines, the cluster in the upper right of each one of these images, which does have some vocalization, somewhat, somewhere between 40 and 50% of the characters in these highly vocalized lines are vocalization marks for things like short vowels, repeated consonants, and so forth. And in all conditions, those lines get much higher error rates or lower levels of accuracy. The problem with vocalization is that if we train without vocalization, we can do much better on lines that are not vocalized than if we increase the output space of the models. And so thinking about how to correct for and collect data for these rare but important to a lot of people phenomena is one of the questions that I'd like to discuss. I'll just write down some possibilities that we've discussed with on our technical team for technical foci in the future stages of the project that I think our current work suggests might be important. After I'm done talking, I can, I'll be, taking notes during our question and answer and during, all of your presentations and discussion. So although I'll come back to this slide, this isn't an exhaustive list of all of the things I'd like to discuss. But briefly, a main issue both with being able to bootstrap corpora for training Arabic script OCR from existing data, such as the digital editions in the Open Islamicate Text Initiative and from other sources, is that not all digital editions use the same transcription criteria. Diacritics are, noisily transcribed. They may be missing. They may be transcribed, using different criteria, and they're of variable importance. There are other variations in orthography and transcription standards, such as variant forms of letters, variant forms of numerals, and so forth. How can we better train OCR systems taking into account this kind of natural variation rather than when we want to go beyond synthetic data, which doesn't have this problem? Similarly, in trying to build a large diverse corpus, not only for print, but for manuscripts, We want to support not just training to improve individual books and typefaces or build completely generalized models, but to think about the structure of our corpora. When some of this will be, touched in the later meeting where we talk about workflows as such, but what technical developments should we undertake in order to support those workflows? For instance, incorporating confidence estimation into the workflows, incorporating post-correction into the workflows. And how can those kinds of inference, both distance supervision and these kinds of confidence estimation and language model rescoring be made more efficient? So, I'm happy to take questions about the state of our project so far, but and then we can go on to hearing from other members of the advisory group. The OCR tool is an open, the OCR tool that we're basing our work on is the open source Kraken project developed by Ben Kiesling and colleagues. Ben is here and a member of the advisory group. And I apologize for not having him introduce himself, but he can wave. The data that we're producing as part of this project is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial share-alike license, and we'll be producing a version of that release very soon. Apostolos, you had a question or a comment.
David, yeah, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Kraken is great. I just wonder if you had any experience with other OCR. So, for example, we had with ADI at the British Library, we had a series of competitions, and the Google OCR did really well. Won the competition, basically, the latest ones, and I wonder if it's worth trying that as well, or if you have any experience with it.
Right. I don't have direct experience with ABI for Arabic script. I've used it in other OCR focused projects. I think do I remember correctly, Quinn, you had some experience with ABI for Arabic?
No, sorry, not ABI. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's talking about Google. They're sort of.
Sorry, yes,
Box cloud thing. But yeah, I'm
right. Google Cloud Vision. Yes, so we did some evaluations early in the project of Google Cloud Vision. It did respectably on these books. I mean, I think in the range in which it did for both the manuscripts in the British Library shared task. Alejandro, do you happen to remember what the baseline evaluation for Google was? I don't have it. I mean, it wasn't part of our main spreadsheet of results. My memory is that averaged on the kinds of data that I'm talking about here, although our annotated data was smaller at the beginning of the project when we evaluated it, Google was getting somewhat better than the baseline rates that we show here. Instead of around 80%, it was getting like 85% at that time. But don't quote me on that. Maybe Alejandro remembers.
We didn't run any.
Alejandro, you were very quiet.
Yes. Hello. Yes. Let me see. Oh, sorry. Hello. Yeah. Hi, David.
Hi.
Yes, I think we didn't run any experiment using Gaggle. I don't remember that. Sorry.
Okay.
We using Tesseract. You remember?
Right. So yes, we also evaluated the the baseline Tesseract Arabic model.
The Tesseract. I remember
that was around 80% as well.
Right.
I apologize. I thought we'd also evaluated some Google Cloud Vision. I mean, primarily my worry is that these evaluations on 19th century typefaces tend to do somewhat worse with models like Google's that are trained on synthetic digital typeface data, but perhaps other people have different experiences.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, Google does not do as well on kind of the pre-born digital typefaces, but also the other thing is, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you know a way of doing this, it's difficult when you're trying to build an open access digital text production pipeline, which is the larger goal of this Mellon grant. It's hard to work with proprietary software like Abby or Google or that group that's associated with Cairo University, who also did very well in the British Library tests. We actually had them at our workshops in the beginning of this grant, and it's really hard to see a way forward working with them, which is why we decided to, if you want to do things open source, open access, et cetera. So anyway, that's also the problem.
I think it's fair to say that it would be a good idea if we ran some benchmarks like that on our data, not because we would, we think, oh, we should put time into, improving the Google system, but so that our results are more useful to others in the field, right? So if somebody says, well, for my project, Cloud Vision is a perfectly reasonable alternative, here's what I could expect to get by using that tool. Right. So, not that we need to be, salespeople for Google, but in helping people decide when to use what tool, that would be a useful thing to do. I don't think would be that, expensive.
Yeah. What I meant was just to compare with different state of the art. In this case, the overall goal is definitely, different in this project. And as Matthew says, it's not useful to have Google incorporated in the pipeline, right, in the workflow, but at least to be aware of what they do.
Yeah.
And you say ours is just as good or better even, right?
Yes, we'd be very happy to say that. So yes, we should go back and, even if I was right that we did some small evaluation of Google at the beginning, doing a benchmark at the end with a full data set would be valuable.
I can chime in too, because this is also related to my question in the chat that, I'm not a Google spokesperson or anything, but we are using Google OCR as the baseline for our project, which we post correct later. And from what we've seen so far, it makes a big difference for type data. We're not working on Arabic, but it makes a big difference for type data because it has seen, so much more data. So my question was whether the results that you presented are actually just contained within the corpus that you have produced. So are you only training on these 41,000 lines that you have, or are there other Arabic OCR corpora that you're using?
So the results that I presented are just the supervised results. I presented some results doing this kind of, distant supervision augmentation, but that's not part of the main results that I'm presenting. But we hope that's going to change. Right. Okay. So I'd asked a couple of people in particular to talk about what they're doing. Thinking about starting with data sets, Adi, arisen from your sickbed, would you like to say a little bit about the British Library evaluation that you were instrumental in organizing?
Sure, yeah, thanks. Just to say that I'd like to share a presentation, but I think I need to be made co-host.
Oh, yes, thank you.
And yes, I'm joining you with COVID, so excuse any brain soup or occasional cough, but I'm mostly doing okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna share this. You can see this okay? Yep, great. So this will only take a few minutes. I'll do a really quick overview of what we've been doing at the library. And as I work with both Asian and African collections, Arabic is of great interest to me, being a very prevalent language in both these continents and in our collections as well. So just to start with how it all started. So this was about 4 years ago. My colleague Nora McGregor started her work with Arabic HDR. And then I replaced her as digital curator for Asian and African collections. So we were working with handwritten text, so with manuscripts. And I put here a few examples of the material that we've been working with. So we have a collection of about 50,000 works. And we worked specifically with Arabic scientific manuscripts that are digitized as part of our Qatar project and available on the QDL website. And I'm very happy to put links down in the chat right after this, so you can follow up on anything. And the main aim of wanting to engage with Arabic HDR was to be able to contribute an open image and ground truth dataset of historical handwritten Arabic texts. And in this link here, you can read a bit more about these initiatives that we've been engaging with. So as Apostolos mentioned, we had a couple of competitions. We ran those in collaboration with the Alan Turing Institute and with Prima Research Lab as well. And the aim was to find an optimal solution for automatically transcribing Arabic historical manuscripts using ground truth that we created. And we did this through two competitions, which were part of these two leading international conferences on pattern recognition. And basically the methodology of this was that we created an example set and then an evaluation set. We gave competition participants the example set, which they had different sizes in the two different competitions, and then the participants used that example set to train their OCR systems, and then they ran their systems on the evaluation set to produce OCR in XML format, and then the results were evaluated by Prima. And the competitions included 3 challenges. So the first one was the main text block detection or segmentation. The second one was text line detection, and the third was the actual OCR. And the evaluation that was done by Prima was basically done in different stages according to these different challenges. So the text block detection, line detection, and text recognition. So this was done according to how far the different methods were applicable within the analysis and recognition workflow. And this is because not all participating systems had this end-to-end application. So some of the participants chose to only only submit for challenge 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, etc. I can't say too much about evaluation because simply because I didn't do that. So this was Christian Klausner from Prima, but I'm happy that Apostolos is here. So feel free to jump in at any point to give more information. But to say it in general terms, the competitions used the evaluation approach that was employed in the ICTAR competitions, and the evaluation methodology took into account the range of situations, so that, for example, each type of error was weighted according to the type of regions involved and the situation that they were found. So there was a consideration of the different contexts, so not every error was considered the same. And also, in addition to the accuracy of the results, the systems were also evaluated on how scalable they are on the wider material. And I put down here some resources to follow up. So, for example, the Prima website has some information on both layout and text evaluation, and you can also download evaluation tools from there. And there's some publications there as well. And this is a paper that was published as a result of the first competition. And then there's a blog post that I wrote as a result of the second competition. After those two competitions, I'm very happy to say more about it if that's of interest. I also tested transcribers, so I used the same ground truth data set that was created for the competitions, and also the same kind of the same pages as an evaluation set and as example set and evaluation set. In this case, the evaluation method is inherent to transcribers, so it is different to Prima. So the results are comparable only to a point. So I think it's probably important to say that when you're doing evaluation, it should be the same for every different thing that is being tested. And there's a link here to some more detail about working with transcribers. Currently, we have this ground truth data set available on the British Library repository. We minted a DOI for it so that people can cite it as well. I put down here just the description of this data set as it appears on our repository. And we do know that people have been downloading it. So we know that there is some use, at least interest. Also, every now and then someone gets in touch with me for me to share my model on transcriber. So and it's always a little bit different. It's not the same type of material, but people think, okay, we can use this as a base model and then further train it on our material. We're obviously very open for any collaboration, and I've been working with quite a few people on the call here, and I'm very happy to continue doing so. So this is basically it for me, but let me know if you'd like to hear more about methods and the competitions, etc.
Thank you very much, Adi. Since you brought up evaluation, and that's something that I am hoping we'll spend some time talking about. Apostos, would you like to comment on the interaction of evaluating layout analysis and line extraction with transcription accuracy, and how, for instance, the weighting system, the weighting scheme you devised was meant to work in this case?
Okay, I can say a few words. Adi made a fantastic presentation of this. So there are two types of evaluation. One is a geometric evaluation of the outlines of regions, right? So we try to have as close as possible description of the outlines of regions using the Theocr tool, and then described in the page format. So general regions, paragraph-like regions, or text lines, or words, or individual glyphs follow the same rules, right? So there's an overlapping calculation of the region with a check of the whatever is not overlapping, whether it contains actually characters or space and so on. So the idea then is to calculate a lot of metrics. And these metrics are then, some of them are important to some applications, some are not, right? So there could be regions of graphics or regions of text, which are very, very important for an OCR scenario. If you are reproducing the whole document very, very accurately, obviously you need all the regions. Now, there are several errors that can be present. It could be from completely missing regions or invented regions. There could be some noise, for example, recognized as a region. And there could be mergers or splits of different regions. And depending on the kind of split, right? If you split regions along the same text line, say if you have, especially a multi-column document, right? If you have two columns and a merger, for example, right? Across the columns will be very, very bad. A merger in the same kind of vertically in the same column, two text lines together will not alter the reading order, for example, right? So the reading order is the most important thing to keep intact in a document. So although these are two independent errors, right? The two different mergers, we can choose to give them, or a user can choose to give them very different weighting in the actual evaluation. So that's the concept of evaluating all the possible errors and then having a reasonable goal-oriented calculation of the error, of the actual error for the application scenario that you're interested. Now, apart from the geometric evaluation, there's the evaluation of the text recognition, right? So there are several ways to do that, from the edit distance calculation, but that can be very difficult when you have multi-column documents and so on, right? So you may have all the text correct, but in the wrong order. It's difficult to calculate that. So you can do bag of words evaluation. We have a new metric called the flexible kind of distance evaluation. And in any case, the idea is to focus on the application scenario that makes sense, right? So if you say, you know, oh, I improved this to, I don't know, 97% as opposed to 96%, maybe it's a massive increase in the correctness of important text, right? That 1% may be very, very useful, or it may not be very useful if you just improve a little bit of some, I don't know, some diacritic that may not be so important. You detected those very well. So I think the concept, the takeaway from this, I think, is the concept of goal-oriented or user case scenario evaluation. To select an appropriate scenario, and then you tailor the weights to what you think is important, right? So in those competitions, we put a lot of weight in recognizing the text, right? So some methods that have errors, for example, a lot of errors in the graphics. The graphic region becomes very fragmented. We chose to be more lenient on that, for example, right? But then you can have a scenario which you want absolutely everything to be extracted from the page as perfectly as possible, with no errors for reproduction further. And then it is a more strict scenario, right? The same you can do, by the way, not only with the evaluation of text, but with the evaluation of the geometric regions, right? So you can say, I don't care about the graphics at all, right? So I only care about the text, therefore report only the errors that are on text regions.
Right.
It's quite flexible, yeah.
Right. And so, you know, for instance, just to give a simple example, there are some regions which are very rare, but might be, you know, highly interesting to some users. So, you know, have you run evaluations where, you know, do you just weight them separately rather than trying to, you know, come up with some multi-objective optimization where you say, you know, I'm going to weight footnotes this much, and I'm going to weight, you know, body text this much, and so on.
Yes, is it a specific type of region? You can do it by type of region.
Right. So that you can.
Yeah.
And we did that with the competition. Yeah, with the second competition, we added the marginalia challenge because that's a lot more challenging than main text. So if a submitted method wanted to be evaluated on that, then it could be evaluated on that or not.
And something to add also, just as I remember it was, you mentioned normalized text and unnormalized text, right? So there were two different evaluations there.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. And, you know, so I hope these issues will come back, but in the interest of moving along, I'd like to ask Shruti Rajwani to talk a little bit about the work that she and Antonis and Graham Newbig and others have been doing on OCR for low resource languages, because I think some of these issues of normalization are very important. Languages for which perhaps there's no normalized writing scheme, they may be linguist specific, as well as distant supervision. In their case, actually taking advantage of translations to improve OCR.
Mm-hmm. Hi everyone. Can you see the presentation? Okay, great. So I'm Shruti, and I'm going to briefly talk about some of our recent work on doing OCR post-correction for low resource languages. I'm going to give some high-level technical details, but happy to talk more in depth later if anyone's interested. So as we all know, there's lots of text data in many low resource languages, but it's locked away in formats that aren't machine readable. So these can be printed books, handwritten documents, typewritten documents, and so on. And one of the main motivations for us starting this project is because the text, although it exists, it can't be used to build downstream NLP systems for these languages. We cannot automatically search through this text and can't efficiently access it online. So while we can use existing OCR methods to extract text from these documents, it's difficult to train high-performance systems because we have so little annotated data. And the transcriptions typically have quite a high error rate. So to improve the results of OCR systems on these low resource languages, we use OCR post-correction. So this process essentially takes a noisy first pass OCR transcription, so it has some errors, as input and fixes the recognition errors to produce a corrected transcription. So we can see that OCR post-correction is a text-based sequence-to-sequence task. So it doesn't use any visual information from the image. It only uses the first pass OCR as its input, and the corrected transcription is the output. So OCR post-correction is quite well studied, particularly for higher resource languages like English, and state-of-the-art methods use character-level encoder-decoder models with attention. So these are neural network models. So characters in the first pass OCR are converted into embeddings and are encoded with a neural network, usually an LSTM, and passed through an attention mechanism, and the decoder LSTM generates the corrected transcription, again at the character level. So the models we've developed build on previous work and adapt them to learning in low resource settings, because we don't have, again, as I said, we have a very minimal amount of annotated data here. So the first thing we do is we add structural biases to the encoder-decoder model. And we do this to make it easier to learn from small amounts of data. And these structural components are based on the nature of the post-correction task. So the biases we add can likely be learned by the model with enough data, but in our low resource setting, adding them explicitly is a simple way to ease learning. The first of these is a diagonal attention loss. So since OCR post-correction is approximately a monotonic sequence-to-sequence task, we expect reordering to be quite rare. And with this in mind, if we create a matrix of the attention vectors from all the decoding time steps, we expect the weights to be higher for elements closer to the diagonal. So we add off-diagonal elements to the training loss when we're learning the model, and this encourages lower weights at those elements. We also know that the first pass OCR recognizes the majority of characters correctly, and we add a copy mechanism to allow the model to copy directly from the input. So the copy mechanism essentially samples from the attention vector, and we use a probability gate to linearly interpolate between the decoder LSTM generating and copying from the attention vector. And we also use a coverage mechanism to keep track of attention weights from previous time steps. And this discourages the model from attending to the same characters repeatedly. So we create a coverage vector with this information and use that as extra input in future time steps. That's kind of the three structural biases we add to the standard encoder decoder model. We also augment the model with additional information from the documents we're trying to extract text from. So many documents that contain text in a low resource language also contain a translation of the text. So translations exist in things like dictionaries or interlinear glosses, linguistic documentation, language learning material, and my slide has a few examples that we found in online archives of such books. So to use this information, so as I said before, we have a low resource language encoder to encode the first pass OCR of the low resource language. We add another encoder to the model to encode the translation. Similarly, at the character level, we use the information from both of these encodings through joint attention mechanism, where we concatenate the context vectors and use that in the decoding process. So looking at experiments, we measure performance in terms of word error rate, and we do experiments on 4 very low resource languages: Ainu, Greco, Yaka, and Kwakwala. They're geographically diverse and orthographically diverse as well. So for the first pass OCR, we use existing OCR methods. We tried a whole bunch of different methods and selected the best ones for each of the languages. So specifically for Ainu, Greco, and Yaka, we used Google Vision. So it actually performs pretty well, even though it's not been actually trained on any of these languages. So it's kind of doing some sort of cross-lingual transfer across the scripts that the languages use. And for Kwakwala, we use the unsupervised OCR system, a software called Ocular. So when we look at the baseline model, which is just a character level encoder decoder model, we see that because we have so little data, it actually doesn't perform very well. It's not able to learn a good distribution over the characters and often performs worse than the first pass OCR. But with our proposed adaptations, overall, we get up to a 52% reduction in word error rate over the first pass OCR. So that was a brief description of kind of the first model that we developed for this task. But this model is learned with supervised learning, so it does need manual annotations to improve any further. However, the unannotated raw images we have that we'd actually need to extract text from are far more in number. So we also developed a semi-supervised learning method to improve the transcription accuracy by using these images, these unlabeled images. So the first thing we do is very simple. We use self-training, where we can get a first pass OCR on the unlabeled images from any existing OCR system, apply a trained post-correction model like our previous best supervised model, and obtain predictions on these images. And then we can use the predictions as pseudo training data to retrain the model. And we can iteratively repeat this process to get better predictions. However, predictions from self-training may have errors, and these can be reinforced in the post-correction model as we retrain it. So to counter this, we create a frequency-based lexicon from the predictions to downweight incorrectly predicted words. And the reason we do this is we empirically observe that incorrect forms are typically less frequent. So currently the probability of the next character in post-correction decoding depends on the decoder LSTM. To explicitly bias the model towards predicting frequently seen words, we incorporate a probability based on word frequency. We call this process lexically aware decoding, and we use very simple linear interpolation to combine the probabilities weighted by a hyperparameter. So to model word frequency, so how do we get this probability, right? To model it, we use a very simple method that explicitly accounts for word frequency, a count-based language model. And given the predictions from self-training, we train a word-level unigram language model on the counts of the word forms. And this gives us frequency-based word-level probabilities. So it's kind of a noisy lexicon. And the count-based language model is updated as the predictions iteratively improve with self-training. So there are lots of technical aspects to combine the LSTM with the count-based model, but I'm not going to talk about them here. Happy to discuss later if anyone's interested. Just looking at the results empirically, when we add semi-supervised learning to the combination of self-training with lexical aware decoding, we reduce the error rate even further. So by up to 22% over the supervised model, which is the first result I presented for all 4 languages in the data set. So our long-term vision is to be able to develop methods that will enable us to extract text from a large number of languages. We've started with 4 and we're hoping to scale up as our next step. Specifically, we're focusing on linguistic archives, such as the Archive of the Indigenous Languages of Latin America, which has over 20,000 documents in hundreds of low resource languages. So this will need improvements to the model on both the visual and language components. And we're currently constructing an extended benchmark data set with over 20 languages from the ILA archive. And the plan is to develop methods to improve transcription accuracy using active learning for effective annotation, as well as including visual features in the post-correction model. We would also like to focus on handwritten text, as it poses a much bigger challenge than the printed and typed documents we've been working with so far. So all our papers, code, and data set are publicly available. Yep, that's all. Thank you so much for your time, and happy to discuss later as well.
Thank you, Shruti. Fantastic work. Yeah, I like this a lot. So since you're talking about incorporating visual features at the end, one question that we've had about incorporating post-correction into our project is how robust these various post-correction models are to changes in the error distribution of the underlying OCR model.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, I mean, you could imagine, a series of models that you always keep the baseline OCR model, and you're effectively, building a family of models by incorporating visual features into post-correction.
Right.
But it might be more efficient, at inference time to simply retrain the baseline OCR model. And so how robust are these post-correction models to differences in that underlying error distribution?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually haven't, well, this is one of the things we wanted to try, but we were basically thinking something along the same lines as to when we say we're including visual features in the post-correction model, it would sort of like, it would actually just be kind of training a new OCR model. So we could basically have some sort of a pipelined approach where we use information from the OCR model to improve the post-correction model, and then kind of feed back into the OCR model to improve it. So effectively, you kind of get an improvement on both the visual and the language components of the OCR system. So that's kind of what I had in mind when, as maybe, like a larger system to kind of improve both components of the model. And that makes sense. One of the advantages of post-correction is that because you're basically focusing on improving from the language side, you can be robust to visual features, right? Like if you have a new layout or a new font or something like that. So, so I think there's definitely like something to think about there and exactly how we would do this.
Mm-hmm. Great. Is there anything, or other questions? Yeah.
So I just want to chime in that we did try these post-correction models starting from either Google OCR or from Ocular for the 4 languages that Shruti talked about. But I don't think we necessarily have robust results, because in most of these languages, one of the systems is significantly better than the other. So we're talking about, a baseline of, a word error rate of 80 versus 30, as opposed to small differences between the 2 models.
Right.
So,
I actually might have an interesting result, because for one of the languages, we did actually get pretty good results from both systems. I can show that now if you'd like, or maybe later if there are other things to talk about now.
Okay, well, I mean, that would be interesting, or if you have it in extra slides and would like to share them, or would like to share some of them anyway.
I just have a figure. I can just share screen and
Okay,
show
good.
you the figure. It's from our paper. Yeah, so essentially so this is like for Quarkula with Google Vision and Ocular. And you can see that our post-correction system actually helps a lot, even when the initial word error rate is pretty high. Right. So like obviously Ocular starts off a lot better than Google Vision, and the final word error rate after post-correction is lower. But even when we're starting with like an 80% word error rate, if we're able to train the model on a similar distribution, it's actually doing pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Thank you. Okay, so since we're talking about being able to do self-training and other kinds of unsupervised learning, I'd like to ask Nikolai Vogler to talk about their work further up the pipeline, or farther down in the basement, or whatever metaphor you want to use.
Yeah. Let me share my screen. All right, can everyone see that? Cool. All right, so I'd like to present our work, Lacuna Reconstruction, which is self-supervised pre-training for Islamicate manuscript transcription. I'm Nikolai Vogler from UCSD, and this is joint work with Jonathan, Matt, and Taylor. Our work is mostly centered around learning OCR and handwriting recognition systems when you don't have thousands or even hundreds of transcribed lines of data. And I'll describe how we do this in the presentation. But we basically try to leverage vast amounts of unlabeled data available to us in order to learn visual language representations that can later be fine-tuned like traditional neural supervised OCR systems in domain. I'll present some large gains in character recognition accuracy we're getting with only 1 to 3 pages of transcribed data. And I'd also like to note that the approach is not particularly language specific. Different pre-training data could be used, but here we'll present results in mostly Arabic script stuff because of the audience. So at first I'd like to emphasize that Islamicate manuscripts, as you know, and neural networks are a little incongruent. While Islamicate manuscripts are often low resourced due to obtain transcriptions, it's pretty difficult. It's challenging. It takes a lot of time. Neural networks actually require a lot of training data, so they it's kind of difficult to adapt into this low resource setting. Islamicate manuscripts also display extreme scribal handwriting variation, which neural networks often struggle with. So I want to talk about our approach to this and how we learn from unlabeled data to adapt neural networks to Islamicate manuscripts. So we take inspiration from the idea of the lacuna in manuscripts. And that's, for those who don't know, a lacuna is a missing portion of a manuscript, such as the one depicted here in the line image. When scholars are faced with lacuna, they try to infer the identities of the missing regions using surrounding context. And that helps you kind of fill in the gaps and see what's there. Scribal handwriting style usually remains constant across the text line. So you normally don't have to worry about the scribal handwriting style changing if you were to try to infer what's missing there. Our approach also takes inspiration from some of these other self-supervised pre-training techniques that have seen a lot of success recently, such as things in machine learning like mass language modeling, vision. There are some instances called SimClear or CLIP, and also speech recognition. We feel that this approach can really motivate OCR for manuscripts. when you view it through kind of this lacuna lens. So first, let me just do a forward pass of our model to show you the idea of our lacuna reconstruction method. First, I want to show you stage 1, which involves the unlabeled data pre-training. So we operate on an extracted text handwriting line image here at the bottom, X. And we process it like other neural OCR models with a CNN. We slide it over our text line image, like so. And that lets us obtain these CNN representations. We take a randomly sampled segment of our image encoding here, H, and we mask out a portion, which we then pass to our context encoder, which is normally an LSTM or transformer-based encoder. And this helps us, of course, learn sequential interactions between these visual representations. And this gives us these contextual encodings C, and particularly the masked encoding CTW. So provided the masked out convolutional encoding HTW in red and this predicted context, we could do something like they've been doing in autoencoding, where you try to reconstruct this original region here in the line image using something like a parameterized neural image decoder. But instead, we actually construct a discriminative objective like Wave2Vec and past work, where we sample this other mass region or this other distractor region in blue here on the line image. Feed that through the network or feed that over into our loss, our reconstruction loss, which here takes the form of a normalized temperature scaled cross entropy. So here what we're trying to do is actually reduce the distance between this masked encoding HTW and our predicted context encoding CTW as using our distractor encoding as a foil. So minimize the distance between HTW and CTW while increasing the distance between CTW and the other regions here, like HTW. So that's how our pre-training phase works with unlabeled data, where we're constructing these sort of masked lacuna segments and training our model using this unlabeled data in a self-supervised fashion. Our second phase of our model is the fine-tuning phase, where we add this fully connected layer onto our network. And we copy the parameters learned through pre-training onto this network. We add this randomly initialized fully connected layer to the top of it. And we perform supervised training using a connectionist temporal classification loss with the transcribed data, which is commonly used in OCR, of course. I'll show some results now, some experiments and results quickly using our methods. First, I'll introduce our pre-training data set that we use for Islamicate HTR. We obtain about 750,000 unlabeled line images from the Hill Museum. We extract them using the Kraken line extraction system. The data here is mostly Syrian manuscripts dated 1600 to 1775. Again, these don't have any labels. These are just raw images we're using for pre-training. Next, I'll introduce some of our fine-tuning data sets, which are used during that stage 2 on the right in the diagram that I showed earlier. These are used for the fine-tuning and reporting of results here. So we have a few different systems. We have a HIML fine-tune, which is used for in-domain experiments. We have the RASM 2019, as Adi presented earlier, which is one of the larger sets of data sets for manuscripts. We have 2 more fine-tuned data sets we use here, which represent kind of different domains. We have a legal text and also a devotional text. For these smaller sets, everything but RASM, we do 3-page training sets, which equate to around 90 lines each. And for RASM, we do a 90%, 10% train test split. So first I'll show results in character accuracy percent across the 4 fine-tuned data sets using the Google Cloud OCR system. Others have pointed out that it can be successful sometimes on some of these documents, but more so for OCR than handwriting recognition. We see quite low results on handwriting recognition for these documents. The highest one is on our Hemel fine-tuned data set, which is only 51% character accuracy. And then our other baseline we show here is doing 0 pre-training, so not using any lacuna reconstruction. This is just taking a standard Kraken type architecture and training it on either 30 or 90 line subsets here for each data set and testing in domain on, for these, a page of held out data or 10% of the data set here for RASM. So next we introduce pre-training, and we add our 75,000 line pre-training results in yellow on top of these supervised in domain results. So this represents taking our learned visual and contextual encoder parameters and copying them over to stage 2 and doing fine tuning on stage 2 separately for each data set on either 30 or 90 lines. We start to see large gains here over the Google Cloud OCR baseline and also the randomly initialized settings in green. Next, we take the full 750,000 lines of unlabeled data, and we see even larger gains on top of the 75K, which is kind of cool to see with an order of magnitude more data what we can get. Again, all unlabeled data we're seeing here. All of these systems see the same amount of, well, like all the systems in green, yellow, and red see the same amount of supervised transcribed data here. One of the coolest trends I'd like to point out real quick is like the ability of our systems using only our best 750,000 line systems seem to be able to perform as well using only 30 lines of data as the systems that use 90 lines of data with like 75,000 lines of pre-training. So I think that's pretty neat, and we're pretty excited about this technique. It's still preliminary, it's under submission, but we thought we'd show it off here because we think it can have large contributions going forward to OCR, especially in these low resource settings. Thank you.
Thank you. This is fantastic stuff, and I know we'll want to talk more about it. I have one question, which is, what do you think the prospects for unsupervised adaptation are? Right? So all the pre-training was on, do I understand it correctly, that the pre-training was on other manuscripts besides the ones you had annotated? What if you pre-trained on the test manuscript but didn't have any annotated data on that manuscript, but you had annotated data on other test manuscripts?
So I think I understand it as basically what's the difference in the setup between like having pre-training data for in the same domain as your fine-tuned data, right? Yeah, well, so, and maybe it needs to get into the details of what actual manuscripts you have data for, but for a given target book, you of course already have the images, so you could be pre-training on that book, and maybe you already are.
Well, I thought maybe the question was also, could you do this unsupervised end to end, right?
Right. Well, not necessarily unsupervised end to end, right? So you have some supervised data to learn the mapping from your encoding to, the actual character set you care about. You need to specify the character set somehow, right? But the point is, you wouldn't have supervised data in the test book, from other pages of that test book. That's really the use case that I think is going to be the most broadly useful. I see. Yeah, there are lots of interesting experimental setups there. So that would only be seeing like the lines itself unlabeled for your test document of interest, and then seeing transcriptions from other documents. I think one of the biggest, what you see with the 30 line versus 90 line settings, you're really seeing
more exposure to the vocabulary because it doesn't know anything about vocabulary during pre-training. So you really need at least a lot of the same symbol inventory in the documents you're fine-tuning on as the ones you're testing on. Unsupervised approaches, like Taylor kind of hinted at, maybe could do away with this if you kind of have you can imagine some approaches where you provided a symbol inventory and you try to learn it, you try to get it to map these visual features to the symbol inventory in an unsupervised way. But yeah, we're mostly limited by the exposure to actual the alphabet itself.
Right, and right. So yeah, they're, as you suggest, they're interesting distributional facts that you could learn just from raw text data. And part of the problem, as I said, is that different scholars' transcription of the same manuscripts may use different symbol inventories, and so modeling that kind of variation is important, whether we're talking about a fully unsupervised method or even a semi-supervised or supervised one.
Mm-hmm. One thing I do remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Nikolai, but we didn't present this here, but we did see pronounced effects on generalization from pre-training. So that like having pre-trained and fine-tuned on an out-of-domain document, you transfer better to a new scribal hand. Presumably just because in pre-training you've seen like all the scribal hands.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, but the transfer is you still have some annotations in the target domain. I mean, better generalization is still really necessary.
But I mean, in a different scribal hand from the target document. So you're better at generalizing between scribal hands if you've already pre-trained.
Right.
And also, like you said, this you pointed out you could probably learn from unlabeled text data as well, and kind of fuse them. Right now, we're like completely language model free. We don't even have a language model. We have the CTC loss on the end. We're not even doing any language model integration during decoding. So that's something that we could definitely see larger gains on. Our language, our CTC only has access to the 30 or 90 lines of data here.
Mm-hmm. And the holy grail, right, is that unsupervised fine tuning, where all you have is the language model to tell you about the character inventory. So you kind of like do like ocular on top of the pre-trained representations. But it's still kind of a fantasy right now.
Okay. So I guess, what I'd like to, Ben, Ben noted in the chat for Hebrew manuscripts. Do you want to say something about, your experiments with, with transfer learning in your HTR work, or other topics you'd like to?
I mean, I can be very, very quick. I don't have slides, but it's mostly the work on Hebrew manuscript my boss has been doing. I'm just I'm the person responsible for Kraken and all the bugs therein, and I'm part of a larger project called Escriptorium, which is basically building an HTR platform for all the written languages of the world. And we've been mostly working with Hebrew, Latin, Syriac, a bit of Arabic lately. And we've also seen this phenomenon that pre-training generalized models produces much better results than training for a specific end, transfer learning for a specific end. It's usually roughly 50% reduction of error. And this is across widely different styles of Hebrew manuscript. So it's basically probably an equivalent between training on training on Maghrebi style Arabic, and then using that as a basis to transfer towards the Nastaliq kind of style. And in that case, we've also seen that problem that reduces the throughput that one can realistically achieve by in a pipeline, in an HDR pipeline, is really the training speed. Because we're working with all these very complex manuscripts, we use this baseline segmentation methods, which basically allows us to recognize arbitrarily shaped lines. But the processing speed of using these lines encoded in this paradigm is fairly slow, and it reduces training speed. So lately, we've added support to get vastly faster training speed by finagling the data into precompiled binary datasets. And now we can basically train on standard GPUs with around 200 lines a second processing speed, which gets us, with the standard Kraken architectures, we can train a model fully from scratch in half an hour, and transfer learning in under 5 minutes, which is almost near real time. So users can actually get interactive results. And yeah, that's obviously desirable from a user perspective, even though it's not as interesting from a research standpoint. Yeah, from the research front, we are basically right now working on reading order. This is obviously quite important for Arabic manuscripts, where there are lots of marginalia, very complex layouts. Also important for fragmentary manuscripts, obviously. And we don't have any results to show yet, but at least there's an again, on the technical side, there is a change request for the pull request for the Alto XML standard to basically be able to actually encode the capabilities of a fully featured reading order determination system that's actually trained. Yeah, that's it. I hope that wasn't too long.
Good. Yeah, I was the one meeting of the Alto board that I attended, I was trying to explain, only encoding a partial order for these kinds of underspecified documents, and I guess we'll see, what the consensus is. Great. So, I know that we've been having discussion throughout these presentations. This, I take full responsibility for the meeting running pace here, but I still think having discussion interleaved has been very helpful. In our remaining time, being cognizant of everyone's schedules, and in particular the people who are squeezing us in before their day starts or after their day ends, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about training in the presence of variation, since this is the issue that I mentioned at the beginning, where different scholars will transcribe a manuscript or printed work differently, or just different digital editions that we're using to bootstrap our process will have different conventions. And I think I really liked what Shruti and Nikolai talked about, taking advantage of natural variation and self-training to deal with these kinds of texts. But I wonder if they or anyone else here, both from our advisory group or anyone publicly, has any suggestions or needs for transcribing texts that have a lot of variation, or that don't have standardized orthography, and any of these issues that make, the standard supervised training paradigm difficult. Another, one way to put it is, we could just, yes.
I mean, I'll just say that a lot of the languages that we work with, being endangered and indigenous in general, just don't really have standardized orthographies. And when it comes to linguistic documentation data, we often have to transcribe phonetic annotations. So, IPA can be narrow, it can be you can have phones or phonemes transcribed depending on what the linguist was looking at. So we definitely have a need for it. We haven't actually looked into it yet because our project just started basically, but we definitely have a need for being able to handle variation.
Right. It's worth pointing out that, there are people who are now doing NLP in the other direction, right? Using graphical representations as lingua franca instead, for machine translation and other tasks, rather than, what we're trying to do here. Apostolos, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it doesn't have to be only a language, but so we work with Family Search. They use our tools to transcribe a lot of genealogy data in different languages. And names, as we know, don't have standard spellings, right? So I think they will be very interested. They are training their own system, so it will be good. They have, I don't know if anybody has been, I have not been yet to any of those. They have a Roots Tech conference, which they usually is sometime in March, I think. They discuss these technologies. It might be good to see what they have and what they can gain from this project, perhaps.
Interesting. Yeah. Thanks. Maria, you've worked with early modern texts where your ground truth might be transcribed according to different conventions.
Yeah, I wanted to mention some of the work that Taylor and I have been doing. So we worked with Latin script. We worked specifically with early modern English, where yes, there was no standardized orthography, so people could spell whichever way they want, and sometimes they would use their own preferred spelling, or they would follow the document, the typesetter would follow the document that they were reprinting. And we were actually working on compositor attribution. So we were specifically, and we are now extending this to more manuscripts. So we're specifically looking at what can we figure out which pages of the book were typeset by the same person based on their spelling preferences. So in there, when we're doing OCR, we actually, for the first book we did this with was a very famous one where, we had a human transcription. So someone sat down and transcribed every line exactly as it is, but it's not really something that you have for a lot of books. So for the ones we're trying to extend to now, we're going to just use the OCR version. And there we actually really care about preserving the variation, because that is what we're looking at. That is what we are going to use as evidence. So this is another use case. I don't know if this is if compositor attribution is something that matters as much for this project. But there are definitely applications in historical bibliography where you not only need to handle the variation, you also need to transcribe the variation very precisely.
Yeah, I think there may be some people here who are interested in, computational bibliographic questions, including me. What I was more thinking about is, as you said, W.W. Gregg transcribed the first folio exactly, right, diplomatically. For other books, you don't have a diplomatic transcription, but you have some text which is close enough to, the actual the actual text that you're trying to OCR. So you have a distant supervision signal, right? It's not like full end-to-end unsupervised OCR like we were discussing before. It's more like, forced alignment where you want to where you have a noisy observation, a noisy measurement of the text that you're trying to transcribe. And so, I don't know, if there are methods that you're looking at now that you'd like to suggest. I mean, I realize if it's preliminary work, you might not want to talk about it, but what kinds of methods you would use to take advantage of, well, we have a modern text of the Duchess of Malfi, or whatever it is that we're trying to analyze.
Well, we were using actually, because the task is slightly different, we were using a pre-trained OCR model, so we were not fine-tuning it on our document. As far as I remember, Taylor, if you
I think we were just out of the box ocular, right?
Yeah, I think that's what we did. Yes.
We might have had a in-domain language model, though, I think. But anyway.
I see. So we did use the modern text, but we use it for a different purpose, because we needed to sort of figure out which spelling corresponds to which word. We just needed to sort of link together the different spellings of the same word. But I know Taylor and I think Shruti also worked on collation a little bit, where you were trying to transcribe multiple editions of the same book, which are only where you don't have a diplomatic transcription for every single edition, but you have the modern version of this text, or some other kind of thing that you're trying to use as supervision. So maybe there's something you can say about that.
I was with David too, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, we did.
Sorry, David. I did not
never
know
got
that.
to publish it. So
yeah,
yes.
We just started. Yeah.
Right. So yes, this is future work that we ourselves are hoping to get back to. So yes, we will be exploring that part of the space as my questions hint. Another issue that's so where this is, for instance, important in Arabic text is the issue, as I raised, of diacritics, right? That that's a classic example of where we get very noisy observations from somebody may be looking at a text with one set of diacritics and remove some of them, or correct some of them, or correct in quotes some of them. And so we have, a distribution over text, over diacritizations that we may or may not observe. This is the case with, other languages as well, whether that's Hebrew manuscripts, or it's these kinds of low resource languages where, linguists devise ad hoc phonetic systems, or, as Antonis said, narrow or wide phonetic or phonemic transcriptions of texts. And so we have a distribution, a family of possible readings of individual lines. Another issue that we talked about at the beginning, in particular, the great work that Adi and Apostolos did in creating evaluations for manuscripts, and that Ben touched on at the end with thinking about reading order, is the interaction of layout analysis and line and text extraction and transcription. So, is there something that is, so, the methods for evaluation that Apostolos talked about were primarily pixel-based. But one thing that we've been interested in this project and haven't, come to any definitive conclusions on is, do we need end-to-end evaluation methods that evaluate page layout analysis, or evaluate text extraction or reading order extraction that correlate better with downstream tasks? As Apostolos said, for instance, a simple example is, rather than just computing the edit distance between the full transcription of a page and some transcription of a page in a different reading order, you might use a bag of words metric instead. But are there other questions of evaluation for going from a two-dimensional or three-dimensional information layout to some downstream task, whether it's bag of words retrieval or other kinds of NLP that we ought to be paying attention to in this project as we deal with complicated print and manuscript documents? Let's see if I can find an example of what I mean, unless.
That one's a bit of a problem. Well, solution, but what can I do?
Sorry, is there somebody's speaking? There's it's very quiet. So just to take this simple example of a fairly straightforward modern page layout, right? We evaluate the accuracy of this layout analysis by various kinds of pixel level overlaps between the ground truth on the left and the model hypothesis on the right. But a good number of these pixels are not important for OCR transcription, right? There's a lot of white space here. And so, a certain, precision and recall in this, white space pixel overlap should have no effect on downstream transcription. Are there ways that we can improve the this correlation? So Apostolos had his hand up, I believe.
Yeah, just to clarify, so the method we applied, right, the layout analysis evaluation is not pixel based, it's region based, right? So there's a polygon that surrounds the regions as you have there. Mm-hmm. And the more tight, so you can create it as tight as possible to the text lines or to the region's outline. And the polygons are evaluated. So it shouldn't affect so much how many pixels, and it's definitely not time consuming in that sense. The only pixel overlap that is checked is whether there is a missing region and you want to see whether it's purely white space or there's something important in there. But that was the whole idea of not evaluating things that don't matter. Mm-hmm. You give importance to the things that are scenario, kind of a scenario that is according to the use case you have.
Mm-hmm. Are there, somebody else, Maria, do you still have your hand up, or is that an old?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question for this. So if the region is what David has shown in the previous slide, right, then it has this blank fragment in there, which shouldn't matter, but you are evaluating the fit, the tightness of fit to that exact rectangle. And even though cutting that blank fragment out should not matter. So am I understanding it right that it's still going to be penalized even if it cuts that part out?
Right. And so, I mean,
So the answer is for me, right? It's
yeah. So I'm with you. Sorry.
Yeah. So the idea is how good is the match between those two regions, right? The ground truth and say one which is larger than the ground truth is only one of the metrics. You can choose to ignore it if you're not interested in how tight the description is, right? Now, it would be a good idea to have your ground truth as tight as possible to the outline of the region. But if it's not, then it's when you want to evaluate, right? So imagine your ground truth is very liberal in terms of describing the polygon around the region, but your actual region is maybe smaller in some cases than the ground truth. This is when in the region that is smaller, we want to see, has it missed something? And then you check the pixels in that small region that appears to be missed from the ground truth, right? Because it's not an exact science, the description of regions. So having tools which wrap around the polygons much more efficiently in the labeling of the ground truth is very important. So you can use those. And then anything else, you just evaluate whether the important content is there. You don't have to evaluate how good the description of the polygon is, although you can measure it, but you can ignore it.
Right. Yeah, Taylor.
I have kind of a general question. I'm not super well educated on the kind of extraction and line extraction and region detection side. But I know that like in a couple of the various pipelines we ourselves have used, like there's some big differences. Like one of them, DH segment, doesn't even really worry about polygons. It just kind of draws text baselines, and which just kind of brings the question to my mind, like, is that an approach that people have thought about as kind of an alternative? Like, if you have all the text baselines, then it's kind of a clustering problem. Like, which text baselines are part of the same set? And it's kind of less of a spatial problem in some sense. Does that have benefits, or is that like?
Yeah.
Kind of
So this is how Kraken's line extraction model works. So Ben is raising his hand to talk about that.
Yeah. So I want to. So first off, the H segment is not a complete segmentation system. The reason that it only produces baselines is that the data set that you need for the publication in the line extraction community only evaluates baselines. It doesn't evaluate bounding polygons. For a recognition system, you still need some kind of region of interest around the baseline. Usually people do bounding polygons. They're usually not trained. Alternatively, you just define something like a fixed distance of the baseline and just declare that to be everything that's of interest. That obviously only works if the size of the handwriting is fairly similar size, but fundamentally you always need some kind of region around it.
But is that then, that was our experience too, like, but if you have a baseline and now you have a line height for that specific baseline,
yeah,
that gets you pretty far along, right? You're almost all the way there.
Yeah. So basically, it depends a bit. I mean, there are scripts that have widely different heights of inside a line. So if you have a script that has a very large initial, for example, and then a very small size, very small continuous line, and you use that as a basis, then you'll get a lot of noise around it, and that reduces the accuracy. The problem is in this field, the what's published, the research is usually not very applicable to actual HDR, because you choose something that works well for the standard data sets, so you get good results, but the variation in the real world is a lot higher.
So what would you suggest we do to build evaluation sets that, you know, do a better job at measuring?
Yeah, I mean, for segmentation, it's all a mess, to be honest. I mean, we don't even have good metrics. I know of multiple people who just decided to use to literally do end-to-end measurements because everything else had too many flaws. You can build better data sets, but there will always be impedance losses. For example, the RASM data set doesn't have baselines, it only has bounding polygons, which makes any kind of evaluation on a system that requires baselines useless. There's this CBAD data set for baselines, but the standard metric that they use for that doesn't ignores the region of interest, and it ignores line orientation, for example. So that's fairly useless for complex manuscripts like Arabic, where you often have very much rotated lines. There are really all kinds of problems here in this domain, I would say, and I think many of them are the result of how publishing in computer science works. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Apostolos, did you want to add something, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, the baselines are important for certain cases, and they can always be added. I think where the bounding polygons of text lines are important is when you have touching characters between text lines, when you have ascenders and descenders kind of overlapping in this direction. right? You can have a path around that separates the two text lines, but if you only have the baselines, you can take parts of the above line and the below line and so on. And I mean, the better data set will have both baselines and outlines, right? So depends what you want to measure, right? You create enough ground truth and you measure all the things and whatever makes more sense for the final product or the individual stage that contributes to the final product, because the complete end-to-end, we don't know where the mistakes happen, right? So once you start optimizing the individual steps and you want to know what the performance of the individual steps, then you need more accurate ground truth in between steps as well.
Right. And not just because, you might say, well, I'm going to build an end-to-end model and it's not going to need this pipeline that separates things. But and that may be true in speech or whatever. But in particular, if you're interested in a scholarly or bibliographic analysis of a manuscript, you actually do want to know when the OCR is basing its transcription on actual visual evidence versus, essentially doing lacuna reconstruction for you on the basis of noisy, noisy visual evidence. I know we only have a couple minutes, and I just realized when I was talking about noisy transcriptions, one thing that's going to become more important as we move to Arabic manuscripts will be things like undotted manuscripts in documentary sources, where I've talked about vocalizations as being noisy, but in some manuscripts, right, even putting a dot under a letter to make it a b versus dots over to make it a te might be spottily done on some documentary Arabic manuscripts. So we're going to need other kinds of ground truth. We're going to need other kinds of training from distant supervision to those. I want I don't know, Antonis or Shruti, if in your project where you're obviously digitizing low resource data sets so that people can do something downstream for them, or Adi, in your work in the British Library where you're trying to build retrieval systems so that historians or scholars of different uses can use OCR materials. Are there any other issues that downstream use cases should inform us as we're building OCR systems?
Yeah, I think you touched this interesting point of basically what's the end use of that, because then we had those conversations at the BL. So for example, some of us wanted a transcription which looks exactly as it does on the manuscript, while others wanted something to be corrected, or if it's an abbreviation to be extracted, etc. Or if something was written originally without the diacritics, then someone may want to have the diacritics in the transcription. So I mean, those conversations didn't go very far, because we don't have currently a retrieval system for Arabic. We have for English and for other Western languages. So it didn't get to a resolution. But when we worked on this on the Arabic project, what we did is basically we created a sort of a guidance to create the ground truth in a systematic way for all the hands. So so whatever you saw, we had some type of basically a guideline document for the ground truth creators to work with. So there's no discrepancies. But what we did do is that we said transcribe exactly what you see. Don't make any interpretations. And for some end users, this is not what they're looking for. So it's an open discussion as far as I'm concerned.
Great.
Yeah, on our side, we are focusing on faithful transcription of whatever's in the document, mostly, so because endangered languages, I wouldn't even know how to normalize it or correct it for most of them. And with the first downstream task that we care about is just digitizing the content that is in ILA, the Archive of the Indigenous Languages of Latin America, so that it's searchable, right? Further down the road, though, I would really like to be able to use these machine readable now data to do NLP stuff. So there's very interesting questions there. So, for example, in the document layout, might reveal if you have parallel sentences, right? If you have translations in Spanish for every sentence or for every paragraph or at the word level, I'd like to be able to discover those associations that are obvious to humans from the document layout. But we don't have a good system for that. And I don't even know if we have metrics for that. I haven't thought about it very carefully yet.
Right, or if we're dreaming, right, we have main text and commentary, and we use NLP to model the relationship between, what part of the text is being commented on, and can we do a better semantic analysis of the page and not just a visual analysis of the page, right? Right, or to put it another way, can we do layout analysis, not at the level of an individual page, but jointly at the level of book design for an entire book? Right? It's like, sure, it might be hard to detect where catchwords are or running titles are, but there's probably going to be a consistent design due to the way that, letterpress printers are actually setting up the form, or the way that, computer typesetting systems are laying out a page, or, less the case with manuscripts, of course, but there are probably still some, regularities which we're not taking advantage of now.
Yeah, absolutely. For our work, we had books that were 2 columns with translations of each other, or we had books that were just running text where the top is, say, Kwakwala, the bottom is in English, and they go through several pages, different heights, depending on how much you could fit in the page and so on, which we did honestly by hand for the handful of pages that we used to train and evaluate our models. But definitely having tools that can do things at the collection level or at the book level, and tell you, oh yeah, this book has 2 columns, the left one is whatever this language, the other is the other, would definitely be super useful.
Yes. In the spirit of personal airing of grievances, I just want people to know that everybody who works on Latin OCR says that multi-column text is this horrible problem, and we're finally fixing it. And with Arabic OCR, it's the exact reverse, right? That now that we have models that interpret 2-column text, it messes up all Arabic and Persian poetry, which if you don't know Arabic and Persian poetry, but you do know, say, Anglo-Saxon poetry, right? It's written in 2 half lines, right, with a gutter down the middle, and so all generic layout analysis models assume it's 2-column text when it's not. So just so that we can have a chip on our shoulder about that. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for participating in this call, especially our learned advisory group members who have opened up new vistas for exciting work going on now and exciting data sets. I will, this meeting is being recorded. I'm also, taking some notes in the Google Doc that I shared with members of the committee. And is there any last things that people like to enter into the record? Ben, did you have your, did you have your hand up for that, or anybody else, even without raising your hand? Okay, that's an old hand, as you are. So thank you very much, everyone. This has been very informative, and we appreciate all of your help as we go forward with the project. As I said, stay tuned for a later meeting where we sort of go into more detail about data production workflows using eScriptorium, in part that Ben just mentioned, the tool that Paris Sciences Lettres they're working on. So have a good day, evening and morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.